Welcome to another Wellness Wednesday, parenting from our Parenting and Mental Health series. I welcome you back, and tonight I want to talk about friend drama. Now, this is one that was actually given to us specifically from one of the people in our community. So I thank you for sharing your interest in this, and we will get started. So again, if you give us some ideas, put them on Facebook, and we will do our best to do some research on it and bring it to you so that you can learn more about the topic. So the person that brought this particularly wanted to talk about friend drama involving her teen daughters. However, I decided to go a little bit further and talk about friend drama in general, transcending age, right? So we're going to look at different age groups, and we're also going to look at the groups in general, not just girls or boys. I found this quote by Bob Marley, and I found it particularly apropos to the topic we're going to speak about tonight. We know that everyone in our lives at some point hurts us, annoys us, frustrates us. We just have to decide which are the ones that are worth fighting for, which are the ones that are worth suffering for, right? And so I think that's particularly appropriate. And we see it all the time with our kids, and we see them go through friend drama, and it's really hard to stand by and watch. It is part of growing up. I can tell you from seeing a lot of adolescents and teens during the pandemic when we were isolated. When those kids came out of isolation and went back to school, a lot of them that missed the middle school years, especially when the drama really starts to heat up, they went into high school lacking a lot of social skills that normal ninth graders would have. And I think that's largely too, to me, that was the first moment where I was like, wow, okay, now I finally understand why middle school exists. So the drama, and you can use the metaphor, right, that if you cut a butterfly out of its chrysalis, it will actually die because its wings are not strong enough to fly. So we have to let our kids strengthen their wings. We have to let them go through some of the drama. However, we don't have to let them go through it alone. And we can help them navigate it in a way where they build really strong social skills going forward. So let's get into it. Friendship, specifically for young children, just categorizing them, tends to be pretty simple and also centered around shared activities. For those of you that have young kids, before the age of 5, they basically play in parallel, right? You have play dates, but they're not really playing that much with each other unless they're playing with an older kid. They're basically playing in parallel. At 5, they start to play with each other, mostly around activities that are told to them or given to them or that they already know how to do. So if you've had them play dress up before, they'll play dress up. If there's a game that they've played, they'll play that, and they'll often try to figure out how to take turns, and they're really focused on things being fair, and they will work through that. And of course, they're trying to learn that. And so oftentimes you'll hear kids scream out, "That's not fair." And they took that toy, especially if they have a younger sibling, right? That gets really, really tough. You can also notice with this age group that their friends change daily, right? One moment they're hanging out with a kid named Zach. The next moment they're hanging out with a kid named Steven. And you can't, I mean, I know I was lucky that my kid basically did keep some of the same friends, but they did change, and it's always hard to keep up with them. I'm like, wait, who's this kid? And unless your kids have extracurricular activities where you get to meet the kids and they're making friends only through school, then you rarely get to see the kids anymore, right? So you don't even know who these friends are. When they're younger, not such a big deal, but they do change pretty quickly. Over time, they'll start to level out. Something I wanted to talk about, so we talked about that 5 to 12 range, and one thing I wanted to bring in is that, I'm big on neuroscience, and I wanted to talk about a little bit about the neuroscience of being social. So starting around 10, the brain's reward systems start to become a little more sensitive, specifically around social interactions. So peer approval starting around 10 starts to feel more satisfying than it did before. Before then, before 10, the main reward center was coming from parental approval. And if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, younger kids can't really take care of themselves. So they need their parents to stick around. They need to have parents around to help them be able to survive. By about age 10, now, some of you may argue this, however, and I would probably argue it too, especially in modern day society. But if you think from many, many years ago, as far as being able to do basic things, if you hunt or fish, you can probably take a 10-year-old out and they can do it. Maybe not well, but they can do it, right? So starting around 10, they start to develop peer relationships and those start to get important. And that's also preparing them for puberty, for when they go through that physiological change as well. So because of that, not just activities that are in person, but also things that are online, platforms like TikTok and Instagram really, really massively stimulate the reward pathways in the brain. So that's another reason to be really careful, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Neuroscience offers some insights into how children and adolescent brains process the friend drama, because they're finally starting to have this sensitivity to peer relationships and to peer approval, that this is a developmental shift starting around age 10, right? And now these friendships are more significant. So the brain's reward system also responds to these social interactions. And it suggests that, so I'm going to get a little technical for a second, but we're going to talk about the ventral striatum and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So if you've heard the prefrontal cortex, so that's that wrinkly part of the brain right up here, that continues to develop. Right now, we say it continues to develop until about 25, which is why, and this is where all executive functioning is, the ventral striatum is a little bit deeper in the brain. And what you want to know about these brain regions is they help children evaluate rewards versus risks. So that's that executive function. You know, should I do this? Is this is the return on investment of my time, of my whatever, worth it, right? So that's that. And then the striatum is deeper, more attached to the limbic system, which is associated with emotions, and that has deeper connection to our reward system. And so we start to pay attention, or I should say, starting at about age 10, emotional sharing and doing things together to get an emotional feeling starts to happen. So kids will start to watch movies together. They will enjoy watching games together or doing things that start taking pictures together or doing things on social media together that will add to the reward system. This is why social media really starts to boom at this time, or they want it, because kids make connections. And when they have these social systems, and this is kind of the basic reward loop, their phone buzzes and they quickly have been trained. Oh, the phone buzzes, that means there's something on there for me. So there's a little bit of anticipation, and then they get it and they get a thumbs up, they get a like, they get a heart, they get a response from a friend that shows them that they're thinking about them. That then gives them a hit of dopamine, and dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's involved mainly with reward. It's also the one that can create addiction. So, if you have ever researched addiction or been part of it, dopamine's released a lot of times when certain chemicals enter our body, certain drugs, different things that we take into our body. It can also happen with gambling, right? We get a big win, dopamine's released, or high risk behaviors, like driving fast or, skydiving, all those things release dopamine. So dopamine kind of coats our brain. Our brain feels super happy. And then we're like, oh, we want to do that again. Okay. So that's the reward cycle. And so you can see how very quickly they become attached to that smartphone or that social media because they keep getting these hits of dopamine. So We'll talk about how to combat that, but I just wanted you to be aware of it from a physiological standpoint so that you could understand why this is happening and have some deeper understanding. So why are we worried about them getting that hit of dopamine? Well, I did talk about a second ago that dopamine, while being a reward neurotransmitter, right, because it makes our brain happy, that can also lead to addictive behaviors because we want that hit of dopamine. Social media platforms are, and gaming, the games that our kids play online are designed to stimulate that reward system. Things like TikTok that have really short clips, those are really quick hits of dopamine. You don't have to wait and wait and wait for something fun or something to make you laugh or something to surprise you. You get it in, 30 seconds. So our ability to wait for a hit of dopamine gets shorter and shorter, so we need it more and more. Within social media platforms, the unfortunate part about it is that while they're getting some interaction, this is what I saw during the pandemic when we were separated, they could still get on social media, but they were isolated. They were by themselves checking it. So that isolation creates a different risk. And because preteens and teens are so receptive to social feedback, it can affect their mental health really, really quickly. They also, on social media, if they're posting things, they can start to get public scrutiny that they aren't normally used to, right? They do something silly, they trip and fall in school, 5 kids see them, right? Maybe they get teased for a little while, but then it's over. They do something that, isn't socially acceptable and they post it on social media, it's there. And it can be seen by hundreds, even thousands of people pretty quickly. And so it's a lot harder to erase that mistake. So also they can do risky behavior that then is quickly erased in things like Snap, where they text someone and then the messages disappear shortly thereafter. And while that's happening, which increased the risk taking behavior, they're also getting scores on who they're, texting or conversing with the most, and everyone can see that. So then you get drama from kids being upset that their best friend is, according to Snap, has a different best friend, right? So that creates unneeded drama. So there are definitely some major risks related to social media that can occur, and it's related to this reward behavior because once you get that reward, you keep going back for more. Think about your favorite candy or chocolate. You eat it. Once you eat it, you want more of it. And then you want more of it. And then every time you start to feel down, you're like, ooh, I want that reward system, right? It becomes hard to get rid of. You can do it with positive things too, but oftentimes we get hooked into it by things that release more dopamine more quickly. So what's the research say about social media and that social interaction and that reward system? Well, it says that really, we're seeing that pre-11, before age 11, if they're using things like Instagram and Snap, experience more harassment. Again, they don't have those social skills yet. They haven't really experienced in-person behaviors where the risk is lower. So if you've ever heard about like failing safely, yes, say silly things, say wrong things in a group of 1 or 2 and learn how to get over it and get by it. Don't say those wrong things or those silly things in groups of hundreds where it's much harder to get rid of. And even people that you don't know can see it. We definitely encourage, and as it says, the US Surgeon General advises that technology companies prioritize youth well-being. I would also say for parents, monitor it and try to keep kids, if you have to give them a phone early because they're home alone or whatever, try to limit social media use as long as possible. Things like Instagram are a little bit better. I know I have it on there, but things like Instagram aren't too bad because a lot of times it's just, posting pictures, but I would monitor it so those pictures don't quickly become inappropriate. Things that I worry more about or I see more issues with in my office are things like Snap, where it's a conversation and things get dicey pretty quickly. So for these kids under 12, what are their common social challenges? While there aren't, as many that we necessarily, there are still some. I still talk about when my daughter had, playground drama because one of the kids that was on a cheerleading team wanted to teach a routine, but then another kid wanted to do a different routine. So they created two teams and they were competing, and kids wanted to change back and forth. And then it made the competition, turned it into friend drama, and people, girls stopped talking. I mean, they were 8. This is crazy. Um, but it happens. The good news was it happened on a playground. It happened around parents that all knew each other, and we were able to monitor it, and they all got over it. Right. So that's failing safely, right? It was a little bit of drama for a few days, but the kids got over it. As parents, we kind of supported the kids through it. We talked through it, talk more about that in a little bit. But, there can be that. There can also be things like, and that's kind of that feeling left out or excluded during play. That was where these two groups were kind of like competing for attention, and people felt left out or not chosen, things like that. When things aren't fair, a lot of times you'll hear, oh, well, the teacher got mad at me, but, little Joey was talking first, right? Somebody else was talking first, but then I answered his question. I got in trouble. That's not fair. Sure, you've heard it before. That's often where social challenges will come in, when one child in the classroom or in a sports team or whatever seems to get favor over another. And that can be where the challenge comes in. There can also be kids early on. We certainly see bullying in elementary schools, unfortunately. Um, Oftentimes that's again an attention-seeking behavior, because the bully, the kid that's kind of creating the situation, is trying to get attention. When I have kids that are victims of bullying in my office, I often talk them through that so that they can take the bullying a little less personally, and also have some compassion for the bully. Not that they need to forgive them or that the behavior is right, but that they can understand, so that they don't internalize the behavior as much as kids do when they feel like it really is personal. Um, it doesn't feel good still. However, there can be some resilience built up, especially with the right support and the right conversations. So the right conversations and the right support. How do we help our children manage the friend drama? Well, coaching younger kids through conflict can be helpful if you do things like role playing, maybe asking them open-ended questions like, well, if you were, like, asking your kid to put themselves in the shoes of the other child, maybe having them tell you what they would say to their friend, and then help them reframe it or reword it a little bit and have them practice it. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth out to get them to do that. I've been there. I've done that with my kids before. However, if they get a little bit of the message and they go in with even 50% of what you talked about, then that's great, right? You're helping them build the skill of how to manage conflict, a much needed skill in today's society, to be able to have respectful discourse, respectful conflict, where you can disagree on something but still be friends. And boy, do we need that today. So helping kids learn how to see someone else's perspective at an early age will help them so much as they get older. Because right now the problems are pretty minor. And most of the time the kids, because they're used to playing different roles, right? They play house and they play doctor and they play teacher all the time. So let them have fun with like playing their other friend and trying to see how they would feel, right? That can really help. Also, fostering a connection between either the two individual kids that are having drama, if the parents can get together and talk about it and then have some supervised time with the two kids together, that can be helpful. And also, don't dismiss what your kids are saying. Often when they're younger, we're like, oh, I don't know if that's true or not. I definitely am there with you. What I've seen more often than not is that the kids, for most kids, they are telling their version of the truth. They hear someone say something that feels, and the kid really said that, and then the other kid might deny it because they don't want to get in trouble. So it doesn't mean you have to put, always believe your child only. The truth's usually somewhere in the middle, and it's also based on the perspective that the other kid is coming from. So Often what I see is when there's kid drama, what the kids end up saying about it, it sounds exactly like their parents. You can see immediately where the words are coming from. So as parents, we really need to watch how we talk about other people in front of them or other kids. I coach my kids' teams, so I'm very conscious about not talking about the other kids on the team, especially when I'm trying to decide like, hey, this kid's skill is not so great, or, I have to move this kid because they don't pay attention. I won't say that stuff in front of my kid because they will hear that and then it might come back out and they might not have it in the context that I meant it for, right? I would talk about that with another adult and say like, hey, this kid struggles paying attention. Like, what position can we put them on the field? Which if you've ever been a coach, you've probably had that kid. Anyway, so that's some ways you can help your kids at an earlier age. Moving on to the preteens, that 10 to 12 is a unique age. Teenager or preteens, this is when peers really, really become important. That's what I was talking about earlier with that, the neuroscience of that kind of a reward system. Kids start wanting to have cell phones, they start wanting to seek those social rewards, like I talked about earlier. They become more tech savvy, so they want to be on technology more. Again, I really encourage limiting any social media. Fine to have the cell phone, to have regular text message conversations or calls or even video chats, but I would really limit the social media because it's harder to control and harder to navigate who they're contacting. Also have a conversation, just from a cybersecurity standpoint, have a conversation with your kid about, hey, if a text message comes in and you don't know who it's from, delete it, and talk to them about how spammers can come in and things like that. You want to do that early so kids are kind of aware, and it'll make them more selective. And kids will start out in this environment where they're like, oh, everybody's friendly and they're just saying hi and they don't really understand it. So again, monitoring will be really helpful. So, again, we talked about it. Kids at this age are much more tuned in to peer interaction and how peers feel about them. Their friend groups will still shift a lot as they get to know themselves better and their own likes and dislikes. And of course, technology adds a whole new dimension for them. Moving on to teenagers, now we go from peers being more important to peers being everything, right? Friendships play such a critical role for teenagers and their emotional well-being as they start to become more independent from their parents, right? They start to rely very heavily on their friend group for support, not so much their parents. In fact, they can become combative with their parents if their parents seem as if the parents are keeping them from their friends. So at the teenage years, because friends are so important, there's a heightened pressure to conform and be accepted. That can sometimes feel like they're compromising their own values to fit in, which can be really tough for kids. This can create a lot of emotional volatility, and there might be a lot of conversations you have to have. And this is a great time, really in the preteen years, to talk about values, family values, what your child values. It might not be exactly the same as you. And I would talk through that and try and be as open as possible about what your child values. So then as they go into their teenage years, they kind of know what they value and they can align their friend group with that, which will be really helpful. Again, I reiterate that prefrontal cortex is still forming. So their executive function, their ability to think completely through risk versus reward ahead of time when they start hanging out with certain groups, or they might have a friend that's really fun and compliments them all the time, but they get in constant trouble, right? Definitely had those clients in my office where they have this one friend that's constantly going out and drinking and being promiscuous as a teenager. And my client's, tagging along, and the mom in me wants to be like, is that really the friend you want to hang out with? Like, that's that, but you have to kind of stay back and let them figure that out, because if you just tell them, then they're less likely to really ingest that information. Talk through it and say like, oh, I can see how that person would be really fun. And can you see where that person, like, talk about risk and reward, right? So that also helps them feel like you're hearing them and you're seeing them and you're participating in their own decision making. So common social challenges for teen, again, we talk about that peer pressure, especially when it comes to risky behaviors. That's where it becomes a challenge. If they're trying to fit in and the kids that they, have accepted them are kids that have high risk behaviors, it's going to be hard for them to want to walk away from that because that's the people that have accepted them. This is why I'm such a strong believer in extracurricular activities, volunteer work, sports, clubs, other, dance, gymnastics, all those things, are great ways for kids to have, more safe peer interaction where the goal is to achieve something that will eventually help them in life, like learning how to be part of a team, learning how to go towards a goal that's hard and challenging, helping people that are less fortunate or helping entities that need help. All of those things are really positive and reinforcing. And if kids can develop friends from those groups, then the risky behavior friends are probably less likely to form. Teenage years, they're more likely to have romantic relationships, not just like the cute hand holding in middle school, but now we're moving into sexual relationships. So really making sure that they understand what that means. Again, risks versus rewards. And I would generally have that conversation with them when they are preteens, long before they get to be sexually interacting, because by then, you might be having that conversation kind of late in the game. They're testing personal identity. There's going to be bullying, especially on social media and online. It can be really, really intense. And kids teens aren't necessarily good fact checkers. They're very emotional. Their emotional part of their brain is actually somewhat enlarged during this time. So they really follow their emotional brain versus their logical brain. And so appealing to the emotions is going to be helpful. So I kind of already alluded to a lot of this, how you can support teenagers. First is to listen. So open your ears, close your mouth, just let them talk about it. Ask open-ended questions that don't seem like pointed. Then mull over it. If you can ask open-ended questions that kind of lead to the advice you want, that's a great way to do it. That is a skill that I certainly haven't perfected, but I'm working on it. So because really these kids just need to feel heard, and they need a sounding board of someone that has possibly gone through similar things, knows the risk versus reward, and also has a vested interest in their best outcome. Avoid micromanaging, try and help them get to the decision versus you telling them what the decision is. Obviously, if there's a safety need, you've got to deal with safety first and deal with it. But as much as possible, if there's a situation where they can fail safely, then that's okay. Let them fail safely so they can really learn the lesson. Every kid, they try and ride a bike, they're going to fall. And that's kind of part of learning how to ride a bike, right? So if you're holding the bike the whole time, you're going to be holding it through adulthood unless you let them fall. I already talked about this, address the risky behaviors early, probably preteen, to make sure that you're getting it covered before stuff might happen. Help teach healthy boundaries. That means you have to set boundaries for you, and the kids see that. The kids have to see you setting healthy boundaries around other things. So that might mean you have to, if cell phones are plugged in down in the kitchen, yours needs to be plugged in down in the kitchen too. You're setting a healthy boundary. If you don't want, now this is a different kind of issue, but if you don't want your kids to do unhealthy behaviors, you might need to set the same boundary for yourself so your child can feel supported. And just letting them see how you set healthy boundaries with other adults, right? If another adult is treating you poorly, set that boundary, and show and talk them through it so they understand what that means. Okay. Helping kids of all ages handle social conflict. So no matter the age, modeling good friendships and teaching good conflict resolution, respectful discourse can really be a foundational skill to help kids socially. Additionally, addressing miscommunication, because that's often what causes conflict and escalates conflicts within friend groups. Happens all the time, certainly on social media, right? Something's taken the wrong way, or someone assumes something, they post it on media, and it becomes, I mean, we hear about fake news all the time. It starts in childhood, where, you know, you hear someone says something, or a child says, oh, this teacher hates me, and then that just becomes, they think it's fact, right? Help your child work through the evidence that exists. Why do you think this person thinks that? Have you talked to this person directly, right? Have them walk through their thoughts and their emotions and how they're reacting to them. Okay, this is good social emotional learning. And help them understand how there could be other reasons, other outcomes, other explanations for what's going on. If you do that, that's going to help them start to look for alternate reasons why things are happening. And ultimately, that will help them get to ground truth better than it would if they just jump to an assumption and stick with it. Encourage offline activities, face-to-face. There's nothing that can replace face-to-face communication. We get so much more out of it. There's so much communication that happens that is not verbal. So when we can see all that other communication and we instinctually pick up on it in person, we are better at communicating and we don't get the miscommunication as much. I already talked about this, you know, helping them understand the emotional conflict, helping them when you have an emotional conflict, talk about it in front of them if it is, you know, age appropriate. Talk about how you just had a fight with your mother or father and they're frustrating you because they, you know, fill in the blank. And talk about it out loud, because then your kids see how you were, and then it can make sure that you kind of work through like, okay, I think this is how I'm going to handle it. And let them hear that. That's going to help them model that same behavior. Technology management, I've already said it several times. Encourage face-to-face is the biggest thing, especially under the age of 12. Really get them outside, get them meeting friends in person. You know, the next best thing is they have their friends in person and they're playing on technology, but at least the two friends are in person together, or the multiple friends are in person together. Okay, fine. That's better than not being on tech. I mean, that's, you know, not quite as great as not being on technology, but at least they're in person, right? Once they get to that preteen stage and they start getting on social media, or that teen stage, really monitor it, explain to them the risks, explain to them how they can spot, you know, scams and frauds, maybe even share one time when you know, somebody scammed you or whatever, and talk to them about being very selective about who they allow to be their friends. For teenagers, you know, at this point, they've been on social media for a while. Encourage breaks. And I honestly would say start the lessons about taking tech breaks earlier. My son is 11. He does get on technology, but he has to set a timer for 20 minutes. He's not allowed to be on it for longer than 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, he has to get up, move around, go outside, do something else. And he is very good about that. Because he knows if he isn't good about it and he sits on it too long, then the technology goes away to all, you know, completely. So, you know, do that early, they will get in that habit later, and it'll be easier for them to manage the technology when they're older. Some books I recommend for you all. These are some ones I found. There are many more. A couple of these books are by the same person, Rosalind Wiseman, who did the Queen Bees and Wannabes and the Masterminds and Wingmen. Great books related to social interactions. I would say, you know, I said the Teenage Brain is for the parents. Yeah, the preteens and the teenagers could read the Queen Bees and the Masterminds. It's it still might be a good read for the parents as well. The Invisible Boy is a great book for kids. That one is an easy read for kids and they can understand it and you can talk through it. So these can be really helpful. Final takeaways. Friend drama is normal. We all have conflict. Back to the Bob Marley thing, you know, people are going to hurt each other. We need to learn, you know, who we're going to take the hurt from. I know that sounds horrible to say, but every once in a while we're going to hurt each other, but we have to learn how to mend it. We do it as parents, right? We get mad at our kids, maybe inappropriately. We yelled them for something that really wasn't a yelling thing. We'll mend it. And so you got to help teach your kids how to mend that. Sometimes that requires teaching your kids humility and saying like, hey, I tell my kids all the time, it's more important to have friends than to win. So when they're playing a game and they get really wound up about fairness or things like that, talking to them about like, well, are we here to have fun? And kind of remind them of that. I was very fortunate that I had a dad that was very smart, but also could be really goofy. And he would like pretend to cheat all the time. He really wasn't trying to win. He was just trying to make sure I didn't get too serious about whatever game we were playing. And I have to tell you, that has been so helpful for throughout life. There have been many times where I would start to get really serious about something, and then I would just back off because, like, wait a minute, why am I here? I'm not here to win something. I'm here to be with friends. I'm here to be with other people. Because ultimately, that's a key sign of a successful life, is having friends and people and connections that are around us throughout life. That helps keep our quality of life up. Loneliness is one of the biggest killers, because it leads to so many other problems and issues. So helping teach kids how to connect is so, so important. And part of teaching kids how to connect is how to deal with conflict. Also, helping kids have diverse friend groups. If they're really into sports, make sure that you're also introducing them to maybe more academic type clubs, or again, volunteer organizations, even really close friends and family, right? A lot of times cousins can be really close friends. Make sure the friend group is diverse, because that helps the child set up really healthy boundaries, and also not have so much pressure on a single friend or friend group, right? If all their friends are on the soccer team and then they get to high school and they don't make the soccer team, they're going to feel lonely and abandoned. But if they have other friend groups, then they'll transition more easily. Finally, empower them, right? Ask open-ended questions, listen. That will help any kid. So I hope for the person that asked for this particular helping kids deal with drama, friend drama. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope this is helpful for many others. If it's helpful, please like us. If you think someone else would find it helpful, please share it with them. And again, if you have other ideas, put it on our social media so that we can look into it for you. Have a great rest of your day and a great week, and I'll see you next week. Be well.